Welcome to this retrospective slash review for the video game Neutopia II, which I just completed early this morning. So one of the things I did, I could have just let the demo reel run in the background, but I decided I'd rather just go ahead and run around and get a little bit of footage from each of the different areas in the game so I could kind of show off all the different environments and things of that nature and give you a good idea of what the game looks like while I give you my thoughts. So let me go ahead and just jump right on into that. And well, there's one thing I definitely have to say about this game. Um, it seems like this one is fairly uh, underrated, to say the least. One of the things I've been doing is I've been, tracking how long it takes for me to beat certain games like this one, and I've noticed that there's not a lot of people that have played this game. It looks like on like the how long to beat website, for instance. There's just not a lot of press or attention given to the game, for lack of a better word, which is kind of interesting because, in my opinion, one of the things about this game is it's very similar to the first Neutopia game, and and just basically everything is improved over the first game. Well, most everything is improved over the first game, I should say. You have a greater selection of items than you had in the first game. You have much more different and varied environments in the game, more musical tracks, more enemy types, and bringing back a lot of the old ones as well. So it's take the same game and expand it and make it better, and that's what they did. And so I find it interesting that the game itself is not talked about as much as the first game. But then again, the first game is also somewhat underrated as well to a certain extent. Now, I will say one of the things about this game is it does bear its Nintendo, its Zelda clone sensibilities on its sleeve. So, like the first game, for instance, you had a life bar. This one doesn't even try to hide it, and he goes with the hearts, just like you saw in Zelda, basically. And so, unabashedly being a Zelda clone, completely like, oh, they were gonna criticize us for being a Zelda clone for the first game, so what the heck? Let's go all the way, and that's exactly what they did, to say the least. But that's perfectly fine. The game itself really is not too terribly difficult, and the puzzles for the most part are actually relatively easy to figure out. Having said that, I feel that that's kind of par for the course for most of these action adventure Zelda type games. So I don't really hold that as a negative for the game. But one thing I will say that the game itself, I believe basically, the graphics look very good. So you can't really compare this to, say, the Super Nintendo version, because Super Nintendo was much later hardware than the TurboGrafx, and the TurboGrafx originally was built to compete with the Famicom or NES, basically. And so from that perspective, it's kind of like a mid-tier system between an 8-bit and a 16-bit. That's the way I always view the TurboGrafx. But I think the graphics are very colorful, and they look very good. And like I said, with all the different, environments and enemy variety, I think the game, just from a visual perspective, it looks really good. It still has that very cutesy look to it that the first game did, and just more of it, basically. Uh, I do feel like not only did the musical tracks, are there a lot more of them, but they're also actually really very, very good. Especially some of the later ones, some of the later areas. I was like, wow, the music is actually very good here. And I found myself saying that over and over again, and with a lot of the places. So, yeah, definitely the variety and quality of the music tracks is very good as well. The I mean, I guess if you're going to criticize the music tracks, any is like they don't really kind of have a sword and sorcery medieval type feel to them. They almost have a somewhat modern sound to them. Well, I guess modern for the 90s, as it were. But it's basically just a very good sounding soundtrack. And I enjoyed listening to a lot of tracks. Like this one here, this lava area, I thought was actually a really good, sound uh, a track as well. So there you have it. So yeah, the visual quality, the sound quality definitely improved. One of the things I feel like the game did take a little bit of a step back initially is how slow your character moved at the beginning of the game. It you felt like you were walking around with concrete shoes on. It's really the best way I have of describing it. You were just very slow very early on in the game. Now, having said that, they did give you the Falcon shoes quite a bit earlier in this game, thankfully. And once you got the Falcon shoes, your character's mobility was, greatly improved, and it was a much needed improvement. But for the first, I'd say, a couple of hours or so into the game, you're definitely slogging it about, to say the least, and that's definitely something I think this game could be rightly criticized for. Um, I mean, other than that, I mean, I guess some people may criticize the puzzles and say they're too easy, and the game itself is too easy. I mean, it's a very linear game, and I do feel that is something that you can continue to give the game some criticism for, is that, yeah, it's very linear, not quite as open-ended as, say, the Zelda games were, especially, the first Zelda game. Um, Another thing I felt was a bit of an annoyance was the rainbow drop, because it's very hard to sometimes line up your movement where the rainbow drop wasn't like locking you in place because you needed to go left and it was like stuck pointing to the right, basically. So that was a bit of an annoyance, to say the least. But other than that, trying to think, it's just one of those. I think the game itself, I don't have too many complaints other than those two things, really. Now, the most of the bosses were not too difficult. Some of them actually did give me a challenge on my first attempt at them, and if you do watch my playthrough, you'll see that my some of my boss battles were pretty sloppy, to be completely honest. But then I was able to go back in them and do much better with my second attempt. So overall, I think the Dearth fight was obviously the more difficult one, by quite a bit. In fact, hindsight being 2020, maybe if I didn't have the wind staff, he wouldn't have been able to use it against me. But I didn't know that was something he was going to do, just pull my staffs away and start beating me with them. That was kind of a jerk move, to say the least. But I guess that's why he's the bad guy, right? So that was an interesting pull on their part, to say the least. But there's a moderate bit of difficulty when dealing with the bosses, and some of the dungeons themselves. Let me go ahead and go back on some of. A lot of the dungeons were actually much more intricate than they were before, so they were much more expansive. There's a lot more to the dungeons, and to a certain extent, that might have been a bit too much for some of them, because they got really, really long. But at the same time, it's also a good thing for a game of this type. So, yeah, even the dungeon layouts, for the most part, most of them were greatly improved over the first game. I mean, I think about the only type of environment that you didn't really have. Well, I mean, actually, I mean, you had the subterranean sphere, the sea sphere, and the sky sphere from the first game, and those weren't really represented very well in this one. So it's a little bit different in the types of environments that you had, but it's still quite a bit more than what was in the first game. I just didn't want to kind of go back to that. I was starting to think like, yeah, you might have missed the sky sphere from the first game, but you know, when I go back and think about it, yeah, all the sphere, those three extra spheres are quite different than what you see in this game. But this game is still very good. This dungeon right here, oddly enough, that popped up on the screen was probably one of the biggest ones in the game, the Twin Towers, and it did take quite a bit of time to get through it. And that is something you could actually criticize the game for as well, in the fact that there was no floor level layout that you could scroll between. Like, you couldn't go from floor 1 to floor 2 with your crystal ball. You can only see the current floor you're on. So that's a criticism I think you could definitely level at the game, as far as the the map layout in the dungeons itself. And this is kind of a good example here as well. Now the emulator I was using was Beetle PCE. That was the core I was using, and it tries to be a very faithful representation of the hardware. And you can tell, like, when you have like the lightning wand going, or staff, I'm not exactly sure what the correct name is. When you have that going, there's a lot of enemies and projectiles on the screen. There is a very noticeable amount of slowdown, a lot basically. So there's definitely a lot more slowdown in that regards compared to the first game. So I will go ahead and point that out as a bit of a negative. But overall, playing through this game, it just is very similar to the first game, but bigger and better. And that's really the best way I can say it. And I would probably give this a score of 85%, because, like I said, I enjoy the first game, but this one was actually arguably a much better game than the first one. It just took everything the first one did and improved it dramatically. Now, your ability to get the game, on the other hand, well, that's not so good. So I got it on my Wii U on the Virtual Console before it got shut down. And Konami, when they put out the TurboGrafx 16 Mini, I believe this was on it, and that was the last time this game has ever been available. So for quite a few years, the game has not been on the market, and Konami is not exactly prolific with putting out their collections of games. They do have collections, but they're very slow about putting them out for whatever reason, even though it should be something that is fairly easy for them to do. So unless you've already got a copy of this game from some other source, there's really no way of going about legally getting the game, and that's kind of a shame. And in case you didn't know, for the TurboGrafx 16, which was a big Hudson Soft console back in the day, Konami, I think they bought them, or something happened, several years ago. So they have the rights to the entire catalog, and that's why you saw a lot of these games on the Wii U, because Konami put them there for people to, purchase on the Wii U Virtual Console. But Konami, just as a company, it seems like they just don't like money. And so I wish they would do a better job of putting this stuff out. You would think they could at least come up with some sort of Steam collection or something where you could get these games. I mean, they put out the TurboGrafx 16 Mini, and to the best of my knowledge, they probably don't have that actively available in the market to buy anymore. So I don't know why they're not capitalizing and just giving people access to the game. So yeah, Konami needs to get their act together, but as a company, they really haven't had their act together for a while now. But that being beside the point, however you go about coming to play this game, I think it's a good time if you enjoy Zelda type action adventure games. This will definitely scratch the itch. It's fun, it's cutesy, and it's just a good time, and well worth giving a shot for certain. In fact, I think, like I said, the first game seems to have a little bit more popularity, but this game needs just as much people experiencing it as the first one. And I feel if people did experience it, they would like the game just as much, if not more, than the first game. At least I did. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the game. I think, like I said, give it a try. And yeah, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.